want to say this. So thank you so much, Emmeline, for that. This week I had the opportunity to participate in something called the Acton Institute. If you remember that the Acton Institute is what created the Poverty Cure, and they are a think tank, a Christian think tank, very academic, and so they had what they call the Acton University. I apologize, it's called the Acton University. And one of the lectures that I listened to, because it's all remote, which I love, it was on corruption and economics. There was an excellent Nigerian woman gave an excellent talk on how people are the richest resource in Africa. I want to try to get that video to all of you. But this other one was done by a Brazilian government official on corruption and economics. And as we think about self-interest, self-deception, self-protection, self-righteousness, and we think about the effect of corruption on the economy, one statistic that struck me was that they did a survey in a couple of different countries, and the one that was African was Sierra Leone, to assess how much do people pay in bribery as a result of corruption. And they said that the rich pay 3% of their income, but the poor pay 13% of their income. And, you know, that's just, when we think about corruption, when we think about a lack of integrity, we often say, you know, there's two people involved, right? The person who's requesting and the person who's making the payment. But there's so much more involved. And when we think about infrastructure not being developed, when we think about, you know, businesses that are broken down, when we think about competition and how corruption breaks down competition, because certain groups are favored more than others, and it's not based on merit, based on work. It just raises the bar in terms of the importance of us to continue to address this. And so I'm going to try to get that video as well and get that out. It's just, we all know the effects, but I think sometimes we lose some of the big picture of it. And so these things that we look at, self-interest, and instead being generous, self-deception as opposed to being honest, self-protection as opposed to being vulnerable, and self-righteousness as opposed to humility are just very important things for us to continue to work on. And as you all have said, we all deal with this, and we don't deal with it once and it goes away. We need to deal with it on a daily basis. I'm very good at self-protection. And keeping myself protected. And so we all have our different areas that we need to look at it as well. So thank you for that, Emmeline. Thank you also for the Word of God that tells us so clearly, you know, what some of these things, you know, need to inform us of this. And I'm thankful that the Word of God is still so relevant for us now. And so part of what we want to do in terms of not being deceived and being realistic is to form budgets. And so the first session this morning or this afternoon is going to be looking at budgets, and then after that we will be looking at bookkeeping. And budgets are going to be for family as well as for organization. And so we'll do a little bit of both. I want to start off with a story that you may have remembered from Integrity and Finance. And now I don't know why my computer sometimes likes to freeze. So I want to read a story. And I would like to do that by sharing my screen. It's not moving. Anybody have any clue as to why? Try this again. There it goes. All right, we're going to read the story of Charity. And this is a story that I picked up when flying from, I think, Accra to Tamale one time in Ghana. And there was a Fly Africa magazine. And one of the things that I have experienced, and I've been doing budgeting and teaching about budgeting since '97, which ages me a little bit. But one of the things I hear frequently from people is, well, that's one thing for you to do in North America, but you know, it's more difficult in Africa, or it's more difficult with levels of poverty and so on. So I loved this story that was from a Ghanaian woman sharing about how her family taught her about finances and specifically about budgeting. So I want to read this together, and after this we're going to go into discussion groups. And I want you to share your own thoughts and your own struggles with budgeting and your own thoughts of how it relates to your context. So I'll read this out loud. A young lady called Charity went through a socialization process, which was one of the most important parts of her upbringing. Her earliest recollection of this process as a little girl still brings a smile to her face and tears in her eyes. The entire family, mom, dad, brothers, and sisters, would sit down the first Sunday afternoon of each month at a table after church and after Sunday dinner. We didn't have much money. We would always look at Daddy's monthly paycheck and then start doing our homework, financial planning and income allocation. Both parents' paychecks were earmarked for all current bills. After that, the upcoming expenses for the month were estimated. Her father's income was also allocated for certain key categories, such as groceries, and she says they ate lots of beans at certain months when they had to make it for less. Despite having to eat a lot of beans, they never failed to give generously to noble causes. Living for less enabled her parents to fund their education because of the hard work and financial prudence on the part of her parents. Charity is very successful today because of the nurturing environment that her parents provided. Her parents demonstrated respect for each other and for their children. They were frugal and they planned and accounted for every penny of their income. Their children were treated as adults rather than infants and were always involved in the Sunday family planning meetings. Each child would make his or her requests and proposals to the planning board, which was the family. She said that if she needed a new textbook or shoes, she would have to explain to the family the reason and the rationale behind the request. Each child had to plan for the meeting and conceptualize a logical theme for the funding. And if one could not, then no money would be earmarked for that item. Charity wondered, imagine if all children growing up in such an environment, they would have leadership skills in knowing how to run business meetings, disbursements, how to budget, and empathy for the needy before the age of 10. The regular meetings were not for finance issues only, but for discussion about household chores and also time to inquire about everyone's vision and goals concerning schoolwork. Her parents made chores fun because they took part. Charity is much more successful and financially better off than her parents, but she trains her children in the same principles and manner, and her kids also appreciate them a lot. She began planning for her kids before they were born. The fact that Charity and her siblings knew about family obligations made them better planners and investors. The question is, what if Charity's parents had different standards? For example, what if they had a six-figure income, did little or no budgeting and planning, and were hyper consumers? They would have communicated a very different message to their children. Their kids would be spoiled. They would expect things to be done for them no matter the cost. All income would be spent on consumer goods, and the kids won't be appreciative of their parents because they didn't teach their kids, let alone to think about a noble cause. Parents must take time to share these values. It's not difficult to do. They can be creative about explaining what money is and its alternative uses. After all, she said, there is magic in compounding of interest and dividends over a lifetime of investment. One of the things I want you to think about as you go to discuss this is the fact that money is disappearing in many ways from our hands. And I don't mean because we're spending, but I mean literally. You know, we are doing more M-Pesa or mobile money. Things are automatically deposited into our accounts. And it used to be that children would see money and they would see savings and they would know how to work towards that. And now, I remember going to the store with my son, and this was, you know, he's 25 now, so this was when we still used checks more than debit cards. And I would say we don't have money, and he would say, but you've got all those papers in your purse. The connection of money to the bank, our children are losing some of that. There's not a direct viewing of that. So how do we deal with this? How do we approach this in our families? What have we learned about money from our own upbringing? And where do we struggle with this in setting family priorities? Just a brief story for me. My husband, my first husband, my late husband, we sat down to do a budget and made a plan for how to do it together. And then he said, you know, you're better with money than I am, so you manage it. And we went for the first few weeks. We had set an amount that we would use for groceries, for food. And the third week or so, we had finished it. And he said, I'm going to the store to buy something. And I said, the money's finished. We don't have any more money that we set in our budget for groceries, for food. And his response was, but I know we have money. Yeah, we do have money, but we agreed as a family that this was what we were going to spend on food. And we've done that. So either we stick to the budget or we don't stick to it. So we ended up struggling for the rest of that month, but we learned a lesson that we have to stick to that. But, you know, it's difficult to do, and it's difficult to come together as a family to do these things. Charity presents a case of how their family did it. And so I want to send you into some discussion groups and talk freely about what your own challenges are or what your own experiences are. And then we'll come back and do a little bit of sharing. But I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to do some sharing on this.